Terry, how's it going?
Hello, Shane Monahan. How are you today?
Great. It's been a while since we sat down and recorded one of these podcasts together.
Yes, well, I'm not sitting, I'm standing. Just
Oh,
if we're going to be factually correct on things here, we want to make sure
we're
that
all about the
we're not
facts.
we're not telling lies to
Fact
the public.
checkers, you know.
I'm standing here. I'm standing at my standing desk. So yes, how are you, sir? I haven't seen you in a while.
Yes, it's been a while. We were foot to the floor, very, very busy May and June, and July was summertime, and I believe you were away on a trip. Is that correct?
Was away for a couple of weeks. I actually got to see the sun, which is very rare in these parts these days. We've had since we've returned, it's just been non-stop rain, sleet, snow, anything you want, really. Yeah, we have it here in Ireland. So
And where
yeah,
did you go
it's
to, Terry?
it's.
Are you allowed to tell the
We went to
world?
France. Went to France. Yeah, went down to France and down the west coast there, and we sailed across, drove down a couple of weeks. Absolutely beautiful. Les Sables d'Olonne is the name of the place, and then on the way home we bought a couple of bottles of wine.
Yeah, and it was just pure
Just
coincidence
just
that
two. Just two.
massive riots happened in France the same period you were there.
I kept getting texts and people sending me links to the different tweets that were going out, and France is on fire and get out of there now, kind of thing, and you want to make sure your ferry's going to be okay. There wasn't a sign of it. I don't think the French were too perturbed either, unless you were in these city centres where all the riots were going on. But
Yeah, you
no,
survived.
didn't catch any of it. Yeah, bar my children. They were the only people rioting in my vicinity. Yeah.
Yes, most definitely. So we talked about facts there at the beginning of this call, and we're going to talk about some very interesting facts and
Yeah.
statistics around the podcast industry, of course, and social audio. Limor, where voices meet, what we're all about, the future of podcast creation, toolkits, technology, and social audio interaction. But there was a fantastic post that was shared on LinkedIn. I'll give a shout out to Alex Chisnell, who may watch this. I'll give him a tag on LinkedIn after we share this podcast together, Terry. But it was a great post because it's something we've been talking about for quite a while with potential customers, partners we're talking with, about the explosion in podcasts, the consumption aspect of it, pushing 500 million listeners globally. I think it's about 465 million and growing. It was 465 at the start of the year, but exponential growth. But content creation, new podcasts are not keeping up with the demand. And very interesting to see those statistics and the drop-off rate. So I'll just mention some of them, which are very, very interesting. That of those estimated 5 million podcasts, many of them are not producing new content. There's 25% of those podcasts have just produced one episode, which is crazy when you think about it. And only 720,000 podcasts have produced more than 10 episodes. 25%
Is that
of
something?
podcasters.
Is that something you found yourself, Shane, in terms of dealing with people getting into the podcast realm? I know the model would be to do a 10-episode podcast to start yourself off. Is it hard to get to that 10-episode? Do you find with people who are new to podcasting, first of all, but once they get to that 10-episode, is there a complete drop off? Do they think about a season 2? Do they take it by seasons? What's your experience, I suppose, in the last 8 years of that?
Yeah, most definitely. The first hurdle is getting started. That's why we came up with Limor in the first place, is to make it easy for people to get started, because people love the idea of starting a podcast. I'm sure you've spoken to loads of your friends. Geez, I was thinking about starting a podcast. The amount of people we've spoken to, business owners, we've actually been looking at starting a podcast for quite a while. They all say for quite a while, but they never action it, because when they actually look at the work it takes just to get started, they don't. They say that's too much. I'll revisit it again. And then to answer your question, if people actually do take the jump, find out very quickly traditional podcasts podcasting, as we term it, what people would think of with your either a studio or a microphone, headphones, full length audio, all the editing, everything that goes with it is a lot of work. And they find out very quickly that they need to structure nearly their whole week around when do I record, finding a guest, what do I talk about, how can I hold a conversation for longer than 20 minutes into an hour. All that side of it is quite daunting to people, and like, Jesus, I have to do this every week, which people think they have to do. You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But again, they think of a traditional podcast. They all feel they need to be a Joe Rogan,
That's it, yeah.
from the off. That's like saying someone you're starting swimming tomorrow and you need to be a Michael Phelps from your first lesson in the pool, which is crazy thinking, but that's what people think. So they drop off from that. And a big part of it, of course, is that the unknown. They go in with no experience, no knowledge, and they're trying to teach themselves, which is also a big issue. And it just doesn't work for them, so they drop off. And people who do stick with it a bit longer, then I think they say, right, I'm going to do 5 episodes or 10 episodes, but they get quite demotivated because they don't get the listenership. And they say, I'm after devoting 10 hours of content, but an extra maybe 20, 30 hours of editing of those 10 episodes, because 20 minutes of audio takes on average around 2 hours of editing for a traditional podcast. And they get 100 downloads for a 10 episode series. And they're like, why did I even bother? And a big issue there
that ties into that statistic then. That's kind of that's almost your reason that is why there is a drop off of that, because people aren't going in becoming full-time podcasters. Let's say they're going to be doing it outside of their normal 9 to 5 working week. They're going to do it nearly as a hobby, and if they don't get that instant gratification after even after going through 10 episodes, the drop off, it's not surprising that people will drop off.
Yeah, it's people put a huge amount of pressure on themselves, I found, when they start a podcast, whether that's an individual or a business. You can understand it slightly more from a business perspective because, they want KPIs, want to achieve certain targets. I think it's still, they should not put the pressure on themselves at the start to begin with, but they expect that, 100,000 listens, they expect to go from 0 to hero overnight. Nothing works like that, especially not podcasting. And the other thing people don't understand is that the traditional podcast platforms or hosts like a Spotify or a Apple Podcast, they're not social media platforms. So they don't work in the same way with the algorithm and the search and trending and pushing content like you would on an Instagram or a YouTube or a TikTok, which means you could put up a video and the next day you get 1 million listens as someone with 100 followers. If something starts trending and takes off, they don't work like that. So there's a huge amount of techniques and work that are required outside of those traditional podcast apps to promote and grow. And it's a slower process. I would liken it, I often use the analogy explaining it. It's like when people start in the gym in January because they want a 6-pack. And after a week, they're like, I don't have a 6-pack yet. This gym stuff isn't working. I give up, because they don't get that instant gratification. It doesn't work like that. It takes time, effort, structure, help from a personal trainer. Very few people with no knowledge of training can go into a gym and build a successful program. It's the same with podcasting, and that's what we offer.
I actually find with that, just to like be the devil's advocate about that part, I find if you get a magic marker or even like just a brown marker, kind of helps, and draw in the 6-pack before you go on your holidays. That seems to work aesthetically anyway. That if you just draw it in, you don't have to do all the gym stuff. Then you just.
But it worked for you because you shaved yourself first, because I know you're quite hairy down there.
That's it. So, yeah.
Gorilla, like the gray, you know what I mean? It's like the silverback.
Man, just pure machismo.
Silverback. It's just too much testosterone.
Like silverback. Yeah. Silver haired silverback. Yes, I'm just distracting you now, Shane. You're on a roll there. Sorry.
Yeah. So.
Go ahead, caller.
So, like the gym, like becoming a silverback gorilla in the gym, it doesn't happen overnight. and you generally need support and guidance on how to get started. It's the same with podcasting. That's, of course, what we offer with our Limor Enterprise, solving problems with the creation, the interaction with the Limor Toolkit, but we support companies and help them to put that program, as it were, or that strategy on to create content so you don't drop off, that you are consistent, that you see progress, because it won't work in isolation. Podcasts won't work in isolation, and most people will realize when they look at it, most of the most successful podcasts in the world already have a very successful social media presence. So they have a strong Instagram or strong YouTube already, or
they're
strong.
they're literally funneling followers into their podcast.
Exactly. It's a lot harder to do it the other way around, which is starting with a podcast first without a social following. So people need to realize that as well, but you can do it. And a great thing, like, I look at those statistics that we're talking about there, and that gets me very excited. I know I love talking about podcasts and social audio and Limor and stuff, but I get very excited because the opportunity as a content creator is amazing. There's no competition in comparison with all the other platforms. There's 2 billion Instagram profiles. There's only 5 million podcasts. And as we mentioned, there's 750,000 of those are actually producing more than 10 episodes, which is incredible. So if you're listening to this and you want to start a podcast, there's never a better time, because the consumption rate, as we mentioned, the market is blowing up. The audience is there, and they're desperate for content. They're desperate for new podcasters, new conversations. And that's how we can help you get started with Limor.
What would be your advice to somebody who's sitting there now and going, okay, that's a great podcast, yeah, but sure, look, what would I be talking about? Who wants to listen to me? What's, there'll be no audience for what I'm interested in. And on that note, I was only talking to a friend of mine 2 weeks ago, just when I came back from holidays, and he said that his cousin, this is a very long-winded roundabout way of saying that basically his cousin was in the job seekers market, so he's looking for a job. Somebody told him, just start a podcast, start talking about what you do. And what did he do? Graphic design. He started doing a podcast with a fellow graphic designer, and after, I don't know, I think it was the 6th or 7th episode, he actually interviewed a man that eventually hired him.
Yeah.
Because the guy saw that, how interested he was in what he does and what he's, very well versed at, and didn't even have to do an interview for the job. He just gave him the job after the podcast. Now, I know that's not going to happen for everybody, but it's just an example of not having to be a Joe Rogan, or not having to be somebody that is out there and comparing yourself to other people. There is an audience for what you're interested in, and you just have to do what you're good at and talk about what you're interested in, and the audience will come to you.
Well, that's the answer there, Terry. Well, one of the answers is, what are you interested in? If you have a passion for something and you love talking about it with your mates anyway, go down that route. There's loads of different styles of podcasts that you can do. You can be a serious business one. You can be talk about movies. You can talk about graphic design. That's brilliant, because that was a passion for him. He had an objective, which is a great suggestion from his friend to actually start a podcast and talk about it. But that's one of the amazing things about podcasting from a business perspective. And we found this over the years from creating our own content, but in particular with Limor, from being out and about creating on-the-go audio at networking events. They're amazing for networking, for building relationships in business, and not even in just in business, but relationships in general. Your network is your net worth, as they say. And it's a great excuse to reach out to someone in an industry or a genre you're interested in and say, listen, I do a podcast about, in my case, just conversations with entrepreneurs or business people, and say, I'd love to talk to you. And for the most part, people say, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to have a chat, because as we mentioned, podcasts, as much as people think they're oversaturated and booming, they're not. And most people have not been asked to be on a podcast, especially in certain genres. So it's a great opportunity to do that. And the other bit of advice is, of course, get in touch with us, and we can help you with strategy and ideas.
I'm just going to make a note now, actually, because that's just a little light bulb went off. I could start a podcast on achieving a six-pack without the work. All you need is a marker.
A razor. There you go. So, Terry,
I was thinking, Shane.
so one thing that you are very talented at is markers and
Instant six-packs.
recording audio. And
Yes.
one thing that you know from experience, because you've been involved in it for many years, but you've gone down the rabbit hole of podcasting, obviously, in the last number of months, and you found out some very interesting statistics or a bit of knowledge on how good it is for your mindset.
I have. I did a very recent edutainment podcast for Limor, and it was all about your brain and how your brain reacts to listening and how your brain reacts to talking and the whole conversation thing and social audio. So basically, I'll just pull it up here now. It's listening to podcasts and engaging with social audio can help to reduce stress and anxiety, provide emotional support, and gain new perspectives on life. Can also assist with increasing self-awareness, which is essential for managing mental health. So basically, the cast that I did for Lemur went into the details of that and what goes on in your brain. You can find it on our social channels, and it's very interesting. I found it very interesting that the benefits far outweigh any negativities. That's for sure. In terms of, I often thought that, okay, if you're listening to something stressful like a true crime or a murder, that you'd be stressed out by it. But there's an actual calming effect to listening to those type of podcasts too, surprisingly enough.
Yeah. It's incredible, and that's a stat we've touched on before, that like twice as much emotional activity is sparked in the brain when listening to audio versus reading or looking at video. How the brain works with sound, music, voice, podcasts. It's incredible, and I think that's what the world is really waking up to, and why the adoption of podcasts is growing at such a pace. Is when people start, they're kind of like, wow, I really like this. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I'm addicted to podcasts now. The amount of people who say once they get started, that's their go-to medium. It's incredible.
So my escape here for a podcast where I get to listen to, the majority of a full podcast would be sitting on a ride-on lawnmower and heading out into the wilderness trying to cut grass. Now, in the July that we've had, it's been more or less impossible to cut grass without it being soggy and wet, and you're in, trench warfare. So I had the headphones on the last day, and I was listening to a podcast about a man who was in Afghanistan during the emergency pullout of Afghanistan at that airport when there was a suicide bomber that blew up a load of people, including him. He lost an arm, he lost a leg. It's a 4-hour podcast, but it is visceral. It's just so, you're just completely engrossed in him describing the story, and you can picture everything that he's talking about. It's just unbelievable. But again, that's an example of where you would be, you'd imagine that you're completely stressed out, but you're removed from obviously the immediacy of the actual story with him telling the story and his experiences and the after effects and everything. And it's just, it really kind of hit home to me how powerful that kind of conversation can be,
Yeah, and I've taken a phrase from your book, the theater of the mind.
Yes.
The brain kicks in to visualize what people are speaking about, which gets you so much more engaged and invested in the conversation. And after listening to someone for 4 hours, you're nearly building that relationship with that person in your head as if you were there with them, and that you could go up and talk to them,
Yes. Yeah. It's it's like Dave Chappelle says about his comedy, the power is in the silence. And it's those gaps, and it's that kind of, you can hear the guy reflecting, you can hear he's caught up in the emotion of it, and you're there with him, and it's so personal. It's so kind of, it's as if you're sitting in the room, more so than looking at it on a television screen. I think that you're just, you're completely engrossed, and you're trying not to run into a ditch or anything like that whilst you're cutting your grass.
But that's again another benefit of podcasts.
That was my own tragic story. Yeah.
Well, you didn't crash, did you?
No. Pulled it out eventually. Yeah.
Good man. But that's another great example of the power of podcast is the ability to multitask. So you cut the grass and you listen to a 4-hour podcast simultaneously, which is
Well,
amazing.
I'm an amazing husband and father, so that
The
comes
fact that
naturally
you
to me
can,
anyway. So
to say that men aren't as good at multitasking is a fallacy, obviously.
quite fancy, yeah.
So no, that is a great thing, and of course, what we have added to the table in regards to the podcast consumption is the podcast interaction with Limor, where you can actually talk directly with either the podcast host or other people who have listened to the podcast. And I'm sure if you had the opportunity to talk to that veteran with a question, would be pretty cool.
Unbelievable, absolute game changer. And I thought of that at the time. I thought, imagine having an interactive conversation with these guys. It would be, absolute game changer. And of course, it's Sean Ryan. Do you know that guy? Is it Sean Ryan?
Sean. I was on his podcast. Was it?
On his podcast, yeah.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, he's very good. He's really good.
Brilliant. Absolutely, and a very good listener. He doesn't kind of jump in and kind of give his own 10 cents. He really listens to what the person is saying. And he's an ex-army, I think. He's an ex-army.
Yeah, special ops, I think, originally.
Well, he was getting very passionate about the whole
Yeah, no, I've been listening to him.
The lack of leadership with regard to all of that situation in Afghanistan. But it was just, again, if you had a social audio aspect to that podcast,
I will be reaching out to Sean in the future.
Absolutely.
He's number 2 now, I think, behind Joe Rogan.
Is he? Worldwide, is he?
Yeah, I think so. Well, maybe a specific niche. I did see him share a post that he was number 2 behind Joe Rogan. So fair play to him. He's exploded in the last number of months, but that comes down to someone who has a passion and an interest in a topic and a great conversation, great people who want to talk and have a story. And as I said, if there's a social audio aspect, getting the opportunity to talk to those type of people as well would be absolutely fantastic. Outside that, in terms of the growth of podcasting, those statistics, is there anything else you want to add from what you've seen in the last 12 months, Terry?
No, not really. I just think that, look, to hit home again about Limor, is the case that it is so easy to do it.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just use your phone and to talk to people. And we did it. We showed that we walk the walk and we talk the talk at the same time by doing, over 40 podcasts at the podcast show and getting brilliant content, getting absolutely, real conversations with real people that were there on the ground. And we're on the cusp of something big, I think, here. Yeah, definitely.
Most definitely. And you talk about the ease of use, and a good segue from Sean Ryan in terms of a war zone. We actually had users on Limor. A big shout out to Hugh Jocelyn from the Gloucester Brewery, who drove over to the Ukraine on a humanitarian.
I heard those. Yeah, I heard those casts. Brilliant.
Yeah, they use Limor in the vans, basically in Ukraine, documenting the journey, and created a podcast and shared it out, which was an amazing user case for us to show how effective it is as a communication tool, a content creation tool in the audio and podcast space. So big shout out to Hugh and the guys, Russell Haynes as well, who was over there. Ollie, you did incredible. I said stuff for the kids and the civilians who are having a hard time over there. But definitely check it out. You can hear it on our LinkedIn page. We've reshared it, Hugh, on LinkedIn as well. And of course, on Limor, if you set up a profile, you can give him a follow, listen back to it. What was really interesting with Hugh with his updates, so he created a podcast, and then in the comment section, he did his updates in the comment section below, which I hadn't seen done before, actually, in all the years of Limor, which was innovative, which was amazing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a one-stop shop basically of his updates. You could just go to that cast and then follow him all the way down and then have people interact with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Which was great. It was quite an innovative way of doing it. So big shout out to Hugh on that one, and big shout out to you, Terry, for taking the time as always to to join me for this quick chat. We're going to be doing more of these, just updates on some of the stats and interesting things that are happening in the space of audio, podcasting, social audio, voice AI as well, which we didn't touch on. There's plenty of stuff we want to talk about there as well. And for anyone who is listening to this on Lemur or via audio podcast or watching it on the social channels via video, hello, and thank you for listening. And if you would like to learn more about what we do at Lemur, our individual users version, or of course the business SaaS model, which is called Lemur Enterprise, definitely check it out at our website, www.lemur.ie, limor.ie, or check out our social media channels across Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. We're very active there. And of course, download Lemur for free from the App Store or Google Play Store. You can set up a profile, instantly start recording podcasts and social audio from your phone anywhere, anytime. And if you do, myself and Terry will say hello in the voice comment section.
And I might even send you a free marker.
Yes, he's got plenty of skills he'd like to share.
Delivery. You might have to pay for delivery and cost. I'll give it to you cost price. I won't take any profit.
Mates rates.
That's it.
So, Terry, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you for talking.
6 packs for life.
6 packs for life. And make sure you give Terry a follow on Lemur as well. His edutainment content is fantastic. He touches across all things to do with podcasting, what's happening. Some really interesting stuff around sonic branding and marketing your business via podcast. So, Terry, anything you want to wrap up with, or you're happy enough with that?
No, that's brilliant, Shane. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you shortly. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers, guys.